for preventing and mitigating the pandemic, the main lessons learned, of course, from COVAX, and perspectives from diversification of R&D and manufacturing for low and middle income countries. Thank you for being here with us today to hold this exchange of view with COVI members on the COVID-19 pandemic. We have 1 hour, so it's a smaller session for the discussion, and it will be conducted as we are used to. Can I please give the floor to Ms. Samia Saad? I hope you are online. Okay, you have to press the speak button. Ms. Saad, you have to, yes.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Mrs. Saad. Very happy to have you here. And I give you gladly the floor to make your introduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'll try and cover some of the points I understand the committee would like to hear. I know that you have already heard from our partners, Gavi, on the procurement side of pieces. What I'm going to focus on today is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation's role, CEPI, which is funding the R&D for emerging infectious diseases. Many of you might know that CEPI was created just post the West Africa Ebola crisis because it was very clear that was very few working on research for emerging infectious diseases where there's market failure. We were launched in 2017, and we were all working on priority high-risk viruses and pathogens based on the high priority list, what called the R&D blueprint of the WHO. And one of those viruses that we were working on was another coronavirus called MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And because when COVID hit, in late 2019, early 2020, we were working with partners already on different vaccine platforms, and some of them were supposed to be rapid response platforms in case of an outbreak of an unknown pathogen, what we call pathogen X. We were able to pivot very, very quickly with some of our partners that were working on this other coronavirus, MERS, to start developing vaccines against COVID. And in fact, we were faster than anybody else in the world. Within 12 days of the sequence being published of the new virus, SARS-CoV-2, we made our first catalytic investment in an mRNA platform, which was Moderna actually, to try and make sufficient material to start conducting a clinical trial. We built up a first wave vaccines, a portfolio of 9 vaccines rapidly based on 3 key criteria, which were speed, scale and access. That was the first wave, but to date we have now a larger portfolio which also includes second generation vaccines as well as what we're calling broadly protective SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, but also as part of our next 5-year plan, which kicked off in 22, we have also working on what we call pan-coronavirus vaccines, so trying to hit multiple coronavirus vaccines together. So let me just start specifically on access. Access is core to why CEPI was formed, so equitable access in terms of making sure nobody is left behind in LMEX and has access to any of the the emerging infectious disease vaccines is core to CEPI's mission and why we were founded. And when COVID hit, we rapidly saw that the market was being cornered unfortunately, by high-income countries, so trying to secure doses. And we were very concerned that LMEX would not receive any COVID vaccines. So with Gavi, we came up with the idea of the COVAX facility and soon partnered with the WHO and UNICEF to create COVAX. And COVAX at its heart was really to try to make sure that any of the R&D that CEPI was investing in and more broadly would procure vaccines on behalf of LMEX, but also self-financing countries, because what we wanted to try to do to stem the tide on just high-income countries.
Oh, that's not so good.
Can you not hear me? Sorry.
Yes, you were just a few seconds offline, but now you're back.
I am
Please
sorry.
continue. Thank you. You can continue.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I will continue. So equitable access is the core of CEPI's mission, and we welcome all initiatives to improve access to life-saving vaccines and medical tools to people all around the world. We can't wait for the next global crisis to establish these kinds of incentives, capacity and partnerships needed to enable more efficient technology transfer to vaccines in vaccine manufacturers in low-middle income countries. CEPI is committed to that agenda and is supportive of continuing efforts at the World Trade Organization to drive the necessary trade policy changes to facilitate more rapid and equitable access. Our COVID experience was that non-tariff barriers also did impede the access objectives. So sustaining national and regional supply in inter-pandemic periods is an extremely complicated exercise. So the business model around this needs to be thought through quite well. It includes aspects such as building quality, sustainable vaccine manufacturing capacity, as well as creating the necessary supply chains, logistics infrastructure, and also delivery within a viable and robust business model. This must be pursued in a coordinated fashion with appropriate political buy-in. Otherwise, future vaccine manufacturing facilities will risk being unsustainable, inefficient, and unlikely to meet the global demand to enable equitable access during the next pandemic. The agreement on TRIPS is potentially a significant development for future pandemic preparedness, but it is not the only tool. Successful tech transfers rely on more than patents only. I think you heard from Dr. Barkley how complicated making vaccines is, and especially as well scaling up some of these new technologies that have been proved to work during COVID. CEPI believes in and operates by an approach where our awardees commit to supporting technology transfer to predefined partners if required. So rather than requiring ownership of intellectual property, we believe this is a better way to address the multiple barriers to development of vaccines, and hence the most effective way of delivering accessible vaccines as quickly as possible without stifling innovation or delaying the urgent vaccine development processes. There's an unexplored opportunity to incentivize technology transfer and enable equitable access through country and regional R&D investments and procurement agreements, such as in the EU, for example. R&D funding agreements could mandate transfer of technology and associated intellectual property to qualified manufacturers in different geographical locations, and CEPI is playing an increasing role in this space. So sustainable manufacturing will also depend upon a transparent and robust supply chain that can enable production unhindered during a crisis. This is reliant on free flow of goods and cross-border trade and investment in suppliers, supply chains, and infrastructure. So use of the COVAX Manufacturing Task Force Marketplace as a model, which CEPI and WHO and Gavi set up during the pandemic, because what we were seeing was that there were barriers to export of certain supplies that were needed to manufacture vaccines. And what we did is create the marketplace to match-make different makers of raw materials and vaccine manufacturers, and we managed through that marketplace to increase the supply of COVID vaccines. Last but not least, in addition to predictable, sustainable financing for preparedness, manufacturing facilities will need access to surge funding to adapt and scale production in a crisis that is available at risk. And this is really important because this was not available during the COVID crisis, to allow for the seamless transition from preparedness and response required in an outbreak. And just to highlight that CEPI, as part of its R&D investments, had to use what we called recoverable loans to secure doses or first refusal of doses for the COVAX facility, because there was no financing at risk that was available in order that we could get supply to low middle income countries. Some of the main lessons from COVAX, I think you heard
Was the connection tested beforehand? Yes. And it was fine? Can we try again?
Can you hear me now? Apologies.
Yeah, you're back. Yeah. This is live online.
Yes, I do apologise.
No problem.
The internet sometimes is a bit unstable. The seamless transition from the development through manufacturing and to deployment and delivery of vaccines is critical, and this must be underpinned by robust and sustainable financing. That is one of the key lessons that we learnt from COVAX. The funding to purchase vaccines was not readily available. Neither was the funding in the first instance for developing a candidate portfolio of vaccines. So we had to all fundraise from scratch. CEPI had money for preparedness, we had some contingency funding, but we had to fundraise from scratch, as did Gavi and the COVAX facility, in order to make the advanced purchase agreements. The additional piece that we learned, that surge financing available at risk when an outbreak occurs, is critical. That was never available. Currently, even with discussions that are ongoing, nobody's really talking about that surge financing at risk. So while donated doses additionally need to be planned, happened during COVID, they did not happen anywhere quickly enough. And often they were donated with short shelf lives, and that was not attractive to countries because they were not going to be able to deploy them fast enough. So if there are donated doses, they need to be planned in advance. So there need to be access agreements by the high-income countries already that includes numbers of doses that will go to LMEX. Vaccine nationalism had a huge negative impact, as we all know, on vaccine access early on in the pandemic. And I talked about the high-income countries, unfortunately, cornering the market and reserving the limited supply. The fact that manufacturing capacity was concentrated only in a handful of high-income countries exacerbated these supply issues. So manufacturing capacity needs to be better distributed around the world, including technology transfers that need to be incentivized and planned for. We would have not succeeded as well. The other lesson that everybody should really be aware of is that we would have not succeeded in rapid development, safe and effective vaccines for COVID-19 without decades of investment in similar viruses, whether it's MERS, SARS, and platform technologies such as mRNA vaccines, vector-based vaccines, and protein subunits. CEPI had made a number of coronavirus investments before the pandemic, which enabled us to really pivot quickly, as I said, during the SARS-CoV outbreak. We must invest in R&D preparedness now, and this is a crucial component of both preparedness but also response, so that we can respond rapidly. And CEPI has set a goal for ourselves and the world to be able to compress the time and shorten the time to development to just 100 days. And we must coordinate critically between therapeutics, vaccines, and diagnostics, which is why the ACT Accelerator, and we're proud to be a founding partner with others in the ACT Accelerator. Let me just move on quickly, because I'm conscious of time, and really tackle a piece around CEPI's role in the diversification of R&D and manufacturing in low and middle income countries. So CEPI was working with multiple product developers, and we also, as part of our portfolio, helped with support tech transfer to others. So several of the vaccines that were actually received emergency use license, such as Oxford AstraZeneca and Novavax, that were supported by, amongst the many that were supported by CEPI, we supported the technology transfer to try and diversify during the pandemic. It was not enough, and but we had other partners in other geographies, such as Biological E in India and SK Bioscience in Korea. And both Biological E and SK Bioscience have now approved for domestic use, have got license for the vaccines. 15 vaccines are still being funded by CEPI, including 12 variant-proof and broadly protective coronavirus vaccines. So CEPI is the only public sector funder of R&D which has leveraged its investments to enable equitable access. And what we are doing now is we sort of, through a call for proposals, we've identified a network of preferred partners almost on each continent, apart from Antarctica, but on each continent, so that in future there is a robust set of manufacturers, preferred manufacturers, that have gone through due diligence, and where we're supporting building that capacity so that they can participate in any rapid scale-up of manufacturing for any future outbreaks. We will be announcing shortly that network of preferred manufacturers. So that's one of our key commitments that we'll be doing and continuing to do in order to geodiversify the vaccine manufacturing capacity and capability so that the supply provision in underserved LMIC regions happens. So let me just move on then to another aspect, which is do we consider whether high and higher income countries played a constructive role in the process of coming to a meaningful agreement within the World Trade Organization as a response to the pandemic? Let's just look specifically at trade policy shifts that are going to be needed to assure an enabling environment for scaling up and scaling out, and scaling up of global manufacturing. The World Trade Organization Ministerial Declaration MC12 provides that the WTO and its member states will continue to analyse and develop policies to address the lessons of COVID-19 pandemic. It's important that those discussions also consider stricter rules on the use of export restrictions. This was a major issue during COVID-19, and I can't emphasise that strongly enough. So it is really important to look at the rules that govern use of export restrictions on pandemic-relevant vaccines, therapeutics and diagnostics, as well as related to raw materials and critical supplies, which were also an issue and a barrier to scaling and diversifying the supply of vaccines. Especially when it comes to intended shipments intended for humanitarian and equitable access mechanisms such as COVAX. Moreover, CEPI encourages consistency and simplification of regulatory review processes, good manufacturing practices and product labelling in order to promote timely access to safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines.
Mrs. Saad, I have two messages. You talk really very fast for the interpreters, and also you should wrap up.
Yes, okay.
That's two messages that are in contradiction, I'm aware. But you can go, there will be a lot of questions and then you can go into
Let me then wrap up then with a last piece. And specifically, I think there was an interest in how CEPI tackles and ensures that vaccine prices are as low as possible. Let me just start by saying CEPI, when it was founded, was very focused on preparedness, and in the early sort of contracts, we were building a candidate pipeline, and so for some of them, it was very early in the development stage where price points and formulas could not be defined, or if there was no manufacturer involved. However, pricing formulas started to be developed more robustly from the times of COVID, and it was really based on putting into practice closely aligning price levels to cost, what we call cost of goods, in a not-for-profit, no-loss for LMICs. And LMIC pricing was not to exceed lowest upper middle income and HIC pricing or tiered pricing based on income levels. And we have published, and I shared with your colleagues who are Secretariat for the committee, our access provisions in our contract so that you can see them. They are all publicly, we have done a summary of the approaches that we have used. And they are online. So with that, I will just stop because I'm sure you'll have specific questions that I can provide some more details on.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Saad, for this introduction. I immediately go to the political groups. Mr. Kimporopoulos, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I also thank and welcome Ms. Saad for being with us today. We were delighted to hear about the recent joint letter between CEPI and HERA. There is indeed significant potential towards supporting the development of medical countermeasures. And this letter is a very important step in this direction. On funding, we need to remind ourselves and our citizens that the EU has done a lot in the international fight against the pandemic. You have spoken about COVAX. We have the Horizon 22. We have Horizon Europe. We have donated billions of doses and billions of aid to assist developing countries. And in this regard, I want to ask you, how have you seen the resource mobilization against COVID-19, and what can be the main lessons learned for the future? You spoke about that, but we want to be more specific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. On my behalf, I have two questions, a general one and a very specific one. The general one is, you mentioned often, and of course it's really very important, that equal access is in the core of what CEPI does. Can you, in just a few sentences, evaluate the role of the European Union in that, both on the money available, the donations, but also the role on the discussions on the TRIPS waiver? My second specific question, yesterday we had a very interesting hearing with Professor Moon, and she dropped the idea of regional R&D funding pools, where that different countries would work together, subsidize together research and development, and in return they get access to the technology without any patenting, as a sort of new model for the future to prepare ourselves for next pandemics. You also mentioned the fact how important it is to work on research and development preparedness. How would you assess that idea? I give you the floor, Mrs. Saad, to answer these questions, and then we go on.
So let me just pick up the first question, which was absolutely the EU played a major role in enabling access. However, like many high-income countries, some of that role came a bit too late with the dose donations. But just to acknowledge the long-standing partnership that CEPI had with the European Union's Horizon 2020 programme, and then through Horizon Europe as well, which continues, we received co-funding from Horizon 2020 to work on two diseases, chikungunya and Rift Valley fever. But when COVID hit, the European Union also committed 100 million euros towards CEPI's work to create candidate vaccines for COVID-19. And out of that, actually, was one vaccine which was a vaccine based in Korea, and it's the first homegrown vaccine that was supported with co-funding from the European Union, CEPI, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it was diversifying where these candidate vaccines were being developed so that they also could be manufactured elsewhere. So that piece around the R&D funding, and I will pick up the chair's question, it was not easy to fundraise for R&D. We did not have financing. We had to use contingency to kick off our R&D funding for the vaccines. But the European Union hosting the May 2020, President Ursula von der Leyen co-hosting with the WHO the May 2020 event to raise funding for Act A really helped bring in financing for CEPI. So in that role, that leadership role, that was really critical for CEPI and all Act A partners, that there was political will and leadership led by the European Commission as well as the WHO to try and raise financing. So we raised quite a substantial amount of financing in that initial wave, and we needed to build on that in order that we raised our 2 billion, almost 2 billion investment case to create the candidate vaccine portfolio. And remember, you need to invest in multiple vaccines right at the beginning because you don't know what is going to work. Back to HERA very quickly, the letter of intent. It's important that the challenge with the whole space of emerging infectious diseases and when outbreaks happen is that having fragmented research, having fragmented and not networked manufacturing networks, is why we are basically we did not make as much progress as we needed to. And ACT-A and COVAX are unique because it did bring different partners with different end-to-end expertise together to try and rally and make sure that was equitable access around the world. The letter of intent is really to try and make sure that regional entities, new entities like HERA, are partnering with global entities, with other existing national entities such as BARDA in the US, or now there's SCARDA in Japan, and other entities all around the world. The important thing is that we collaborate and we set out how we work together and we don't duplicate efforts, because there's a lot of work and for efficiency and efficiency of resourcing and know-how, it's really important to partner. And the letter of intent sets out how we're going to work together and leverage each other's capacities. CEPI both works on very focused on equitable access for LMICs, but also on pathogen X and rapid response platforms. And one of our visions for the 100 days is that we need to be better prepared and create what we call vaccine libraries, so prepared candidates for the 25 virus families that cause human disease. And partnering with organizations like HERA on because no one entity can do everything. So we need to partner on which areas are most relevant for the EU and then other regions of the world. So we're very excited about that partnership with HERA. We're also creating similar partnerships with other entities. And we see our role as a neutral broker, really, because we are a public-private partnership and can move quite rapidly, have good internal expertise that we're willing to share and partner with new entities that are being created on health security around the world. Madam Chair, on your question on the regional R&D, it is an interesting idea. We do think that solving or making a more robust ecosystem needs to be looked at a regional level. But we also worry, you must make sure that science is driving the agenda and you have the ability to make scientific decisions, robust scientific decisions, and make investments quickly. So any regional entities need to make sure that they are really scientifically driven and have good accountability and transparency mechanisms for policymakers, but the science drives. So with any regional R&D or manufacturing, which is the way CEPI thinks, the world will become more resilient and robust. It's important, though, that any regional regional entities are networked, right? And that's really important because, again, you hedge your bets, you might not be making the right investments, and it's important to partner and build the know-how across different regions around the world. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Madame Trélène-Noir, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Saad, for your very good explanations to the crucial questions already addressed by my colleagues. As a medical doctor, I would like to have, if possible, answers to the questions that are raised to me from what I saw on your website. You are supporting the development by the Dutch Organization for Clinical Development and Vaccine Manufacturing, Intravac, a vaccine against SARS-CoV-2 that can be administered by nasal route. and the preliminary preclinical results are promising. And many questions arise to me. The first one is, given the recognized efficacy of the vaccines already on the market, what would be, in your opinion, the methodology of future clinical studies? In other terms, is it really ethical to compare the administration of a candidate vaccine to a placebo? And the answer is in the question. Another one is, could the cost of this type of vaccine be more competitive than those already on the market? And finally, would intranasal administration, that is through local and general immunity, give better protection, but also maybe a better reduction in the transmission of the virus? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Jutta Paulus, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here. Because of the large financial contributions to the research and development of new vaccines that were done by CEPI, we think you also expressed that CEPI has the potential to improve the equitable access to vaccines, because of course you could attach conditions to the funding. And you expressed very well that access was one of the primary goals, but unfortunately the bitter reality was that vaccines were not fairly distributed, so that even healthcare workers in the global south were at risk because they couldn't be vaccinated. So do you think your current policy guide provides sufficient tools to negotiate meaningful contractual clauses on affordability, availability, transparency, sharing of IP rights, and also promoting local manufacturing capacity in low and middle income countries? Are there plans to revise the policy guide after the inequalities which we have witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic? And which solution would you, as a follow-up or a second question, which solution would you propose to solve the financing problem for scaling up production quickly in emergency situations? Would you envision, for example, something like an emergency financing pool based at the UN or based within one of the UN programs on global health, for example, which could be used in case that we need financing of rapid R&D of emerging threats? Or which kind of financing tool would you see there? And follow-up question, your CEO, Dr. Hatchett, recently commented in favor of access conditions on R&D fundings and sharing on technologies. And I would like to know, is this a concrete commitment for CEPI to adopt enforceable access conditions? Will you commit to sharing intellectual property rights and technologies to manufacturers in the global south? We had a hearing yesterday where it was very well laid out how publicly funded research could lead to a vaccine that is really affordable and really accessible for a lot of people for as little as €3, where the publicly funded research and development led to a licensing in India, for example, which really helped India out with their vaccination campaign. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Saad.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear and see you.
Okay, so let me just say, while I'm a molecular biologist and cell biologist by training, I'm not a vaccine developer. My role within CEPI is to work with governments and philanthropies really to make sure we bring in financing and partnership for the work that CEPI does. So we can certainly follow up on the Intravac question, but I think what we realise for sure is that we need better, we need second generation vaccines. So the first wave of vaccines really had a really high impact in terms of creating an immune response, preventing severe disease and deaths. But we hope we are not out of the pandemic completely, but as we move from sort of the acute phase to having an endemic virus, we will need better tools, and that's why CEPI is investing. Plus, some of the vaccines that we have are not thermostable; they need to be frozen at -80. We need multiple doses, etc. So CEPI is working, and Intravac is part of a second generation of vaccines. To find different delivery mechanisms. Your point about can we get better mucosal because immunity through an intranasal delivery mechanism. These are things that we're testing, right, to try and see, because there will be other respiratory viruses as well. So it'll help advance the science more broadly for respiratory diseases. So I will leave it at that, but happy to follow up with some of my R&D colleagues who can provide some more details on that investment, what we hope to achieve out of it. But we do need a second generation of vaccines, and CEPI and broadly protective SARS-CoV vaccines, because the virus is still mutating, and we need to keep ahead of it. And the way to be ahead of it is to have a broadly protective vaccine, but also work on beta pan-coronavirus vaccines in case there are future coronavirus vaccines that that come up in the future. On the access pieces and IP, our access terms we've always had an access policy, even pre-COVID, right? There are always access terms that are negotiated as part of our R&D contract, and that was the case during COVID. I do want to point out that the reason for non-equitable access are multifaceted, and they are not just related to IP or access terms that you bring in during the R&D phases. It was because high-income countries cornered the market. It was because the dose donations didn't happen quickly enough. It was because without money committed by high-income governments and middle-income governments rapidly, you cannot make advance purchase agreements with no money, and there wasn't a surge financing facility to do that in, right? So the money came in not as quickly as it needed to be if we were going to try to have equitable access. And then there are multifaceted other issues, whether it's vaccine hesitancy as the waves of COVID were coming down, demand, etc. So lots of different multifaceted reasons for the inequitable access. But to say CEPI's role, which is really in the R&D piece, so we don't negotiate the procurement deals, others do, such as the COVAX facility, whether it's UNICEF or regional bodies, etc., or local high-income government procurement agencies, etc. So CEPI does not seek to own the intellectual property as part of our policy, and the reason for this is that, contrary to the situation with small molecule medicals, there are no barriers to development of vaccines, or there are more barriers to development of vaccines than just patents. It is a complex business to make vaccines and biological materials, and the know-how and trade secrets, as well as access to biological materials such as cell lines and the regulatory approval for platforms, in particular things like adjuvants, which help make a better vaccine and better immune response. So moreover, the vaccine developers relying on a platform to develop vaccines will want to ensure that their technology is managed properly so that it is available to develop other vaccines. So CEPI's approach is to really require awardees to manage the IP in such a way that equitable access can be realized, so fostering technology transfer, for example. And in the case of COVID-19, doses were made available to the COVAX facility for fair allocation and procurement. So we secured almost 2 billion doses through first right of refusal through the R&D contracts, and then they could be procured through COVAX. And just to say that we've learnt many lessons through the process, and we are updating our access policy. And you can see, as I said, how we've applied the approach to access and how we managed to secure first right of refusal for the COVAX facility of up to almost 2 billion vaccines through our access agreements as part of the R&D investments.
Thank you very much. Mrs. de la Pisa.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, was created at Davos in 2017 after Ebola, with a great amount of financing from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And that has a seat at the Council. Its mission is to develop vaccines and other biological responses to threats and pandemics so that they can be accessible to everybody who needs them. That is the definition of the organisation. Now, in truth, I don't really understand it. I don't really understand the crucial role that CEPI is supposed to play. It's clear here that the actions of the WHO and the EU are always supported by philanthropic endeavours such as COVAX. And philanthropy is welcome, but seeing how international pandemic preparedness is based on a private initiative where plurality and democratic representation is not guaranteed, naturally there can be conflicts of interest. You said it yourself when you spoke of the plan. Changes in trade policy, the network of manufacturers, prices, quantities, profit margins, IP. It almost sounds like you're legislators. I can only manifest my astonishment at how much influence organisations such as yours have, and it worries me that institutions such as ours and the EU is being overrun. They're talking about the EU as a partner. Countries are no longer international players and stakeholders, and foundations and organisations such as yours have taken their place. This was created, I reiterate this, at the Davos Forum in 2017. I would like to be reassured. Perhaps I haven't understood CEPI's role properly, and I would really like for you to explain to me better how it is involved in international decision-making, such as during the pandemic. Thank you.
Very much. Mrs. Donato.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Mrs. Saad, for your presentation. Well, I need to wrap up very briefly what you told us. Well, CEPI was founded in Davos. Their founders are two non-EU governments, Norway and India, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, another foundation which is welcome, founded in 1936, which is today an investment fund, where the board has as a chair Julia Gillard, the former Premier of Australia, and also still member of the WEF, where she's chair of the Global Partnership for Education. So she's in the WEF again, and WEF is one of the founding members. So so far, the CEPI, as you told us, has the purpose of collecting money in simple words, because it deals only with financing research and development to produce second-generation vaccines to tackle new global crises given from outbreaks of diseases, infective diseases. Well, as we know, and I today sent to Mrs. President a letter with attached the documents BioXiv research assessing that the origin of COVID outbreak was a laboratory virus created in a laboratory with a gain of function research. As we know that, I think that expecting new pandemics as the one we are living, have lived so far, could not be a problem if we just forbid gain of function research all over the world. And all of this money collected by private and public entities, public money, which is given to, at the end, goes to multinational pharmaceutical companies that are not willing to share their patents, their IP, to other producers. So there is no, public interest purpose. It's just profit. They collect huge profits. So I think that, and also global manufacturing you were talking about is always reserved to the same multinationals. So my Question is, why should public money be collected and be given just for big profit purpose and not for public interest? Thank you.
Thank you very much, mevrouw Fransen. Cindy?
Thank you very much. Many thanks for giving me the floor, and I will indeed address some questions today. As we all know, sorry, but I think it was for the next speaker. I'm sorry.
You are on my list, Cindy, but that's
no,
okay.
it's for Mr. Dlomo. That's the reason why I was
I
a bit
understand,
surprised. So thank you.
Understand. Okay, if nobody else wants to take the floor, I give back the floor to Mrs. Saad. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to clarify, we are, the founding partners were a few governments and two philanthropies, but the number of governments expanded quite a bit during the COVID pandemic. So we were funded, and we have an investors council that has full visibility of the portfolio and to create an accountability mechanism. During the COVID-19 outbreak, I think we ended up having over almost between 25 to 28 countries that gave funding, from low and middle income and high income countries, and several European countries, including Italy, Germany, the UK, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Spain made a pledge as well. So several European countries, Serbia gave us financing. So several European countries also gave financing to CEPI, because we were, this was pre-HERA being set up. And we were the only organization that was really including equitable access right from the get-go, and with that in mind, that nobody should be left behind, and access to LMEC. So the decision making sits with a scientific advisory committee and experts. And there was an external research, development and manufacturing committee with international experts that were not direct. They were not sitting on pharmaceutical bodies. There was no conflict of interest, but they were ex-pharma experts with product development and vaccine development expertise that were helping us look and do due diligence on the investments. And every single contract had speed, scale and access as some of the key criteria that were guiding making those investments. So I do want to highlight that we are a public-private partnership, no private sector financing, as in no pharmaceutical industry financing comes in to CEPI, and there is private sector that is from non-pharmaceutical companies, but they do not sit in any of the governance bodies. They are donations, and then they just they are contributed. But largely, the funding by far billions and billions. So I think from a few smaller foundations and maybe some corporate social responsibility, like Citibank, for example, that amount was 25 million. But the largest amount of funding is from over 25 countries that came in for COVID-19 to make up our 1.8 billion in resources. And just wanted to clarify that. Then going to some of the other questions so we have a strong advocacy responsibility, and our role is in investing in the R&D with access commitments that enable equitable access. And as a reminder, we did secure first right of refusal through our securing doses through the R&D contracts on behalf of the COVAX facility. So we coordinate and engage, but final decisions are left to countries and multilateral orgs. We don't do the procurement. We invest in the R&D with the access conditions. And as I said, we built a portfolio that was very diverse. As I said, the vaccines that were developed weren't only in high-income countries. We now have 2 vaccines, one in India and one in South Korea, as well, that were funded and have received emergency use license at the national level. So diversifying the footprint of both R&D and where the manufacturers are is key, we think, to global access and to sort of diversified capacity around the world. Our interventions are really to support and enable. Just want to highlight that there is no evidence that the WHO has found that COVID was a lab-created virus. And monkeypox and the current Sudan Ebola virus are examples that outbreaks and spillovers occur all the time from other animals. We follow the science. That is a really critical piece. So our role really is to ensure, as I said, that equitable access terms are in our R&D contracts from the early stages, but then we need to partner with procurement agencies once there are outbreaks, so that these vaccines go through the later stages of development and can be procured. Germany was an investor since 2017, so I did want to highlight again the diversity of the investors. You can go to our website and it's very transparent, the diversity of investors and largely public sector funding. We do constantly advocate. Our role in advocacy is for reduction in barriers to technology sharing, and successful tech transfers rely on more than just patents. So where patents are a barrier, we advocate for voluntary licensing and participation in the medicines patent pool and other mechanisms to broaden manufacturing capacity and enable access. And our commitment to creating a distributed around the world manufacturing network is one of those commitments. And as I said, we did facilitate technology transfer for the companies that were developing vaccines with some of our R&D money, so that there was distributed manufacturing, not just in Europe and North America, but other parts of the world, to sort of try and help avoid having vaccine nationalism and export bans. So that continues to be a role that CEPI will play, and our preferred network of partners will be partners for technology transfer from some of our R&D partners. So our role in really being that bridge, being that technical advisor and matchmaking to help facilitate is core to one of the approaches that we have to enable access. Over. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Saab, for being here online, but being here, take the time, answer all these questions. And we move on now to point number 8, that is an exchange of view with Dr. Delomo, Deputy Health Minister of the Republic of South Africa. And can I say, Dr. Delomo, we are very proud and happy and honored to have you in our committee. We had in this last 2 days, we had many important guests, academia. We will have the WTO, the WHO. We had experts, we had NGOs, but it is very important that we also have somebody with political responsibility from the Global South, and not just any country from the Global South. South Africa has played in many aspects a very important role in this pandemic. We all remember that Omicron virus was detected in South Africa, and at that time South Africa did everything that was necessary to alert the rest of the world, as every country should do. South Africa did that, but the reaction of the rest of the world wasn't as it should be. they started closing their borders instead of immediately go to the aid and the help and because these variants, that's what we learned in any case, they will cross all the borders, not just borders of neighboring countries, but borders of continents. So it would be interesting to see your views on that. And of course, you played a very important role in the whole TRIPS waiver discussion. You were, I think, very courageous at that moment. It was not easy, and you also played a very important role in local production and tech transfer. So many reasons why we are very happy to have you here, and I'm very looking forward to your introduction. Mr. Dlomo, you have, Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Oh,